Back in the mid-70s, they got married and moved to Tennessee from Ohio. One New Year's Eve, they stayed with some friends. My mom says she doesn't even think they were drinking or smoking weed, which I find hard to believe, considering I know how they were back then. But if she says they weren't, they probably weren't. Both of them were laying on the floor watching TV, while their friends sat on the couch. Their young daughter was in bed sleeping. My mom heard shuffling and looked over from the TV at the doorway to the hall and saw a short female waking her way towards the bathroom. She was wearing a long, old-fashioned nightgown and a sleeping cap. My mom asked her friends where they had got their daughter that nightgown and cap and said they were cute. They said their daughter didn't have a nightgown or cap, that she had pajamas. Mom looked at Dad and asked him if he had seen that, and he said he had. They checked the bathroom and nobody was in it. There was nowhere else for anyone to go. They checked the bedroom and the daughter was in bed sleeping in her pajamas. The house sat down below the main road, which curved right as it got to the house and ran along in front of it. The friends told my parents that one night somebody drove straight off the road and crashed through the roof into the living room, landed on the old lady, and killed her. It was her they saw. I'm a freshman in college. I've had more than just one paranormal encounter, but this is by far the worst. I attend an all-girls Catholic school, and it's almost 100 years old with cemeteries on campus for the nuns we have. That's not relevant to the story, but I just wanted to provide details. Anyway, it was about 10 PM on a weekday when I started getting bubble guts. I had to use the restroom, and I mean use the restroom. I hate going number 2 in the restroom on my floor because someone is always in there. Before I tell you this next part, I just want to say that I've been doing this for a very long time and never faced any problems until that day. I used the restroom in the basement. I promise the basement doesn't look like what you think it does. It looks decent and it connects from the first floor lobby via a small staircase, so I was never afraid. Not only that, but the restroom down there is pretty nice and clean. When the elevator brought me down to the basement, I walked in getting ready to do my business. When I opened the bathroom door, I noticed the stall door was closed. I was surprised because in all my times doing this, no one was ever in here besides another freshman teammate of mine who did the same. Immediately thinking it was her, I peered under the stalls to see her blue Crocs. Except there was nothing there, no feet. I figured someone got embarrassed that I walked in and picked up their feet or something like that. I decided to leave them alone, and as I turned my back to leave the toilet paper in that stall, it started getting yanked out. It was being pulled out so fast it made its container shake, making a loud noise. My heart picked up its pace, but I convinced myself that someone was in there and was now just in a rush. I left and headed towards the elevator. After I pushed the button, the toilet paper stopped. It was taking forever, and just as I was losing my patience, I heard the stall door from inside the restroom fly open. It flew open as if someone had kicked it. At this point, I knew the stairs were the smart option. The stairwell is located right next to the elevator, so I wasted no time. I opened the basement door, and just as I stepped into the stairwell, the bathroom door opened. But again, as if someone had kicked it open with enough force to make it hit the wall. My brain was telling me that it was just a person who was in a rush, but my body didn't let me turn around to check. Just as I made it up the first flight of stairs, the worst thing happened. The basement door that I had just walked through swung open, again as if someone kicked it. Following that, loud, heavy and fast footsteps were coming up after me, and they were moving quickly. I was afraid, but didn't let it get to me. I had already passed the first floor door and I only lived on the second floor, so I started running. The other footsteps seemed to be echoing so loud throughout the stairwell. I was getting my keys ready to open my floor door. When I got to it, I unlocked the door while hearing the footsteps get closer and louder. I ran inside and bolted to my room door, the first door on the left wing. I put my back against my room door and waited. Just a second later, the same loud footsteps ran through the hall and sounded like they stopped in the dead in the middle. I poked my head around the corner, expecting to see my teammate pranking me out, but there was nothing, except the stairwell door closing. I ran to the middle of that area to look down the right wing hall, and there was still nothing. I still tell myself that it was just a person who was in a rush, and I just didn't see them. The sound of the toilet paper and the sounds of the fast, heavy footsteps haunt me when I think about them. I'm uneasy, I'm unsure about the whole incident. The only thing I'm sure about is that I'll never go back to that restroom again. During winter break, my roommate decided to bunk our beds. I was home and she stayed on campus, so she and her cousin had done it. I was excited about it since we've talked about it before. When I came back to school, I had the bottom bunk, which I was grateful for. Every time my roommate laid on the top bunk, the bottom of her mattress would sag from her weight. I would often put my feet under her mattress to push up, making her jump. We thought it was funny. She worked for Amazon and had the graveyard shift. On the weekends and a couple of weekdays, she would leave around 6 p.m. and come back at 5 a.m. One particular Friday night, I had returned to my dorm at about 10 p.m. after hanging out with some friends. I knew it would be empty since my roommate was long gone for work. I remember this really uneasy feeling I got from the room. I stood in the doorway staring at everything. It looked fine. There was nothing weird about it, but something just felt off. I even thought about sleeping in a friend's room, but I was too exhausted and just brushed it off as post-hanging out sadness. I changed, threw on my headphones, and before I knew it, I'd drifted off. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. I remember being cold despite always being hot. I remember looking at my room. Everything was lit up deep red because of my roommate's LED lights she had put up. I was confused that they were on until a quiet moan threw me off. It sounded very raspy. It was so quiet I couldn't figure out if the noise was in my head or if it had really happened. The same uneasy feeling started creeping up my spine. My head whipped around and I was staring at the sagging mattress above me. I breathed a sigh of relief knowing my roommate was there. I put my feet onto her mattress and gently pushed it, heavier than usual. Like a lot heavier. At this point I was thinking she snuck someone in while I slept. I heard the rapsy moan again and knew that it was definitely coming from above me. The sound of it really struck dead in me. It almost sounded like an old man sleeping with his mouth open. That's the best way I can describe it. When I noticed it was still pitch black outside, I wondered what time it was. When my roommate got back, the sun was usually peeking through. I reached for my phone to check the time, and when it did, my heart sunk. It was only midnight, and my roommate never got off early, let alone 5 hours early. At this point, I was very uncomfortable, and I knew that I wouldn't sleep until I saw for myself who the hell was there. Even if she did sneak someone in, I would be kind of upset, so I wanted to check. I was creeping out of my bed to check. The second my foot hit the floor, the mattress above me moved. The sound of it moving wasn't any type of shuffling. It sounded like all of weight on it had been lifted. It scared me, so I quickly ran and turned around. I started crying. There was no one else in the room. I just remember feeling really defeated and empty. The whole thing felt like it lasted hours, but it was really only a matter of minutes. There was no one else awake at this hour, so I called my friends from back home since I was a few hours ahead of them. I cried telling them the story. I had all the lights on and was sitting on my desk telling them. They knew about the stairwell story and marked it up on me still being scared of that, so my brain made it up. I hung up feeling flustered and exhausted, but I didn't want to sleep. I watched TV until my roommate got back and I told her what had happened. My roommate laughed it off until she climbed up to her bunk, which is when she paused. She asked me if I had laid on it or something, and I said no. When I asked why, she said her bed was messy, and before she left for work, her bed was made. I couldn't sleep with the lights off after that. The sound of the raspy moan and the sound of the mattress really stuck with me. When I go back next year, I won't be having a roommate. It will be good, since my current roommate and I left off on bad terms. I've had other encounters, but these two were by far the worst. I'll start by giving some context. My great grandfather bought a large plot of land in the woods of QC, where he was not only built his home, but also saved old buildings that were about to get destroyed by moving them on his land. Those buildings date from the 17 to the 1800s. They were probably houses, as they're quite small and made out of logs. Since then, my parents, who I live with, and my grandparents have also built their homes there. We sometimes rent out those buildings as cottages, and lots of people have said that they encountered spirits in some way. I myself have stayed in those buildings overnight very often, but have never experienced anything out of the ordinary for the 18 years I've lived there. Until a couple nights ago. My boyfriend and I often hang out in one of those buildings. It's a 2-story high observatory with stairs on the outside that lead up to the second floor. We went there at about 9:30 pm and accidentally fell asleep on the couch at 11 pm. I woke up suddenly at 1:30 am, woke my boyfriend up and prepared to leave. It's important to note that we're in the middle of the woods. My house is a 5-minute walk from there. As he opens the door, we hear a song playing in the distance. I didn't recognize it, but it just sounded like ambient elevator music. He closes the door out of fear, but I brush it off, as there's a public park not far away from here where shady people often hang out at night. Plus, we live near the river where sound travels easily. So I nonchalantly open the door again, but this time, I hear a piano playing extremely close, as if someone was playing it on the balcony upstairs. It sounded so clear. We didn't bring speakers, and there were no instruments on the second floor, so it would be impossible for music to be playing. We both heard the music. It definitely sounded like a song as it had structure, but I didn't recognize it. It was a melancholic classic composition. It sounded kinda sad. I shut the door. We could only hear it when the door was open, so it came from outside. My initial thought was it was somebody on the balcony upstairs, and at that point we're both terrified, so I call my mom to pick us up. After a couple minutes she pulls up, and when we walk outside, the piano wasn't playing anymore, and there were no signs of a person being up there. We didn't hear footsteps or any other noise, just the piano. If I were alone, I would have thought it was some kind of hallucination as I was half asleep, but the fact that we both heard it made it so real. When we got in the car, she tells us that my sibling had woken her up 5 minutes before we called, because she heard a high-pitched noise coming from outside her room. My mom also told us that when my sibling woke her up, the dog, who was usually a heavy sleeper and very calm at night, was crying. 2 days later, my grandmother, who was very active in our town's community, said that on that same night at 2 am, a man supposedly saw a UFO. He said he saw flickering lights in the sky and that they suddenly disappeared. Could these events all be related? They all happened in the same half hour and in the same town. I don't know if this could be helpful, but my grandmother had recently moved about 20 antique objects to the second floor, so perhaps a spirit was attached to one of those objects. I'm just having a hard time explaining where the music comes from. My buddy's house he used to live in with his parents was haunted. Some nights back when we just graduated high school, I would get a sense of uneasiness, but would just listen to music and fall asleep. Then after a while, each night it grew progressively worse until the last few times of staying the night were by far terroring. First it went from simple uneasiness to full-on hearing things. I would spend the night in the guest room and have music playing in my ears all night, so I wouldn't hear the sounds. Well, one night I didn't have it. I heard feet shuffling through the carpet as if someone woke up to check on me. They all slept upstairs while the guest bedroom was downstairs by the bathroom, kitchen and main door. I sat up to hear the footsteps come to the door and then stop. You can just feel it that they were peering in, but nobody was there. Then hearing the feet shuffling back up the stairs. I tried to make nothing of it, but the footsteps were loud, like someone physically was making rounds. Finally, after a few times, I mustered the courage to go spot them like it was my buddy trying to mess with me. Just remembering brings tears into my eyes. And what I saw was not my buddy, but a pair of slightly transparent feet in socks shuffling towards me, stopping mere steps away, then turning to the bathroom on the right and walking in there. I hauled ass up to my buddy's bedroom to wake him up, but he wouldn't listen. He claimed it was the wind. It wasn't windy at all. It's the rain. It wasn't raining that entire week. It's ants. Yes, the wise man has been a marvel. I gave up and was forced to return to the guest room, terrified. How could I sleep? What can I do? I prayed and prayed. I didn't have my music player at all to distract me. I would hear the rounds again, upstairs to each room, down the stairs, in the living room, dining room, then my area, then back up. But each trip they would come further into the room, watch me, and then leave. First was lingering at the door, make a round, and then just in the door, make a round, then at the foot of the bed, then at the side of my bed. I was praying, begging, pleading for God or Jesus to help me. Finally came to the last round and final time I ever laid in that bed. After it stopped at the foot of the bed, waiting, not leaving, suddenly a terrifying sensation crept throughout my body. My fucking hair on one side of my body stood on end with goosebumps, adrenaline rushing, heart beating 100+ beats per minute, as the sensation overwhelmed me slowly from leg up to my head, as it enveloped the entire side. Then out of fear, I couldn't really move. I needed to, I wanted to, but it was like I didn't know how. As it got worse and worse, more and more intense, you just know what is happening but can't stop or control it. You feel invaded, and that horrible negative intention is outright terrifying. I eventually overcame my fear and forced my way, somehow, out of that cursed room, rushed up to my buddy's bedroom, woke him up again, had to give him a video game of mine to convince him to stay up with me as I waited to leave. Bastard still laughs at me and tells people, lol, he thinks my old house was haunted. Fuck that. Never again. This happened in 2007 when I was visiting India. While there are many facts that I can't explain in the story because I simply do not know how to explain them, it is most definitely a true story. One that I often share with friends and family when talking about potential paranormal encounters. Unusual people seem interested, so I decided to share it on here. You're welcome to offer theories of what actually may have happened, because to this day, it makes no sense to me. My family is from rural India and often went back to visit in the day, haven't been for a long time. During one trip, we were invited by a way extended family member to visit their home for tea and supper. My family wasn't that close to them. I honestly don't even know how we were related. However, they seemed very excited at the thought of us coming over. We assured they were just bored and interested in the family that was visiting from abroad. So my mother, my mother's sister, and I decided to go. We took a family friend with us who drove our car. It was difficult driving on the uneven rural roads. The house was quite the distance into the middle of nowhere and surrounded by farmland. The drive there took almost 2 hours on bumpy roads. There was a well and a few houses next to theirs that all looked very old and run down. They had 2 neighbours directly next to them and 3 houses behind them, but nothing else nearby. The hosts were really nice to us and showed us around some of the land during the daytime. After we spent a day there and ate dinner, they invited us to spend the night there since it was late. It was dark outside and the drive back would have been dangerous and long, so we decided to stay. It was summertime and very hot inside the room since there was no AC. Usually during times like this, people in this area sleep outside on beds called manjas. You can search it up if you want a visual. Me and my mom slept on the one right outside their house under a tree in their front yard. Not like a typical western yard with grass and a pathway, more like an empty area of nothing except dirt and a few trees before the big gate to exit their property. The others were sleeping kinda far away from us. I don't know why it was like that, but we just didn't place our manja right next to everyone else. Sometime in the middle of the night, my mom woke up gasping for breath and crying, which woke me up. I asked her what was wrong, and she said some man was just on top of her and strangling her. She seemed very panicked and scared. I assumed she must have been having a bad dream. I saw my aunt walking over with a flashlight as she heard my mom from where she was and wanted to know what was wrong. When she shined the flashlight over at us, I saw that my mom had red marks on her neck. My mom still kept exclaiming that she had been strangled and was explaining this to my aunt. We were puzzled because we didn't see anyone leaving and the front gate was still locked. Unless someone jumped the gate, which is possible and maybe in the darkness I missed them leaving, it didn't make any sense at the moment. However, it really started to not make sense the next day. Before we left, we went to the house behind the one we were staying at because they were friends with our relatives. In the house, my mom saw a picture on display and instantly looked shocked. Everyone turned to look at her to see what was wrong. My mom looked back at us and said the man in that picture was the one who strangled her last night. My mom had never heard of this man before or seen a picture of him, but apparently vividly remembers him strangling her. The members of the house looked confused and said, "That's not possible. He's dead." He had recently passed away after a truck hit him on the front road of their property. I've tried to rationally think about the situation, but I have no idea what happened that night. If my mom was just dreaming this entire time, the marks on her neck and the fact that she knew exactly what he looked like before she ever saw him makes no sense. A few years back, I went to my friend Shane's house to pick up some ganj. Shane lived in a recently built house and shared it with two other roommates, a male and female. Both of his roommates were gone while I was there, so it was just me and Shane in the house for my entire visit. After we chit-chatted for a bit and I tell him how much bud I want, we both fell silent as he began to weigh it out. The house is completely quiet, no TV or radio on, as we both stare focused at his scale. When, out of nowhere, I hear in a sing-song tone, a little girl's voice very clearly say, "Shane, Shane." I look up at my friend without saying a word. I was honestly confused at first. My mind was racing. I thought we were in his house alone. Could it be his female roommate, I wonder? No, we were definitely alone. I knew that. On top of this, I knew none of the people living in that house had kids. My rational brain couldn't find a reasonable explanation for what I just heard, so I just stared at Shane to gauge his response. Shane didn't move. He just kept his head down and continued to go on about his business, as if he hadn't heard anything. This confused me even more, and not wanting to be rude, I waited another beat to see if he would respond to whoever was calling his name. When he still didn't do anything, I said, "Hey, someone is calling you." That's when Shane looked up at me, slowly, and said, "So, you heard that too?" My eyes must have been the size of dinner plates at that moment. I could feel my heart racing. Heard that too? What did he mean? I asked Shane what he heard, and he said he heard a little girl call his name twice. I said I heard the same thing. Shane went on to explain that he hears a little girl calling his name all the time in the house. No one else ever seemed to hear it, so he just thought he was going crazy. Until that night when I heard it, clear as day. After he told me that, we both fell silent again as he finished up. I paid him what I owed him and got out of there quick. To this day, this remains to be one of the most paranormal experiences I've ever had. I can't help but feel like it was real too, especially because both Shane and I heard it. I want to start by saying that, though I have a history of mental health struggles, that I'm not, nor have I ever been schizophrenic. I've never hallucinated, auditory or otherwise. In fact, all of the experiences I have had, starting over 2 years ago, began after I left a Christian cult and my mental health began to improve. Back when the experiences began, I lived in Mississippi, and as my kid had claimed since moving there, our house was absolutely haunted. Things moved, disembodied voices, often mimicking my voice or my then husband's, shadow people, visible orbs, and a lot of ghost cats. I thought leaving that house would be the end of my experiences. Wrong. While I've had many experiences over recent years, one stands out to me over the others, and it was witnessed by three other people. Right before the pandemic, my small family moved to Washington State to be with family who weren't involved in the cult. It felt like coming home, like I should have been with them all along, and generally all around the most positive choice I've ever made. To get on our feet, we lived with my aunt and uncle for several months, until we could find work and a home of our own. My aunt and uncle actually run a pagan community and have a lot of Celtic imagery of deity figures from Ireland. To say their house had a lot of spirit activity is an understatement. I hadn't been in their door half an hour before things began to happen. Something poked my butt when no one was standing behind me, touched the shaved side of my head, and on more than one occasion called me by my name. All events with witnesses who also began to experience the same things. The most noteworthy experience I had there was the one that will stand out in my memory with crystal clarity forever. Myself, my aunt, my uncle, and my husband were all in their living room, a small room set to the side in their double wide where we had gathered for the evening to watch some TV. The only one not present was my kid, Victory, aged 11 at the time, who was in the library which doubles as their room on the other side of the house. I was sitting on an easy chair when I look up to see my kid walking by the entry to the room to head into the kitchen. They locked eyes on me, and I instantly knew something wasn't right. For context, my child is on the autism spectrum. They don't like to make eye contact, and if they have to, they de-escalate the sensations by being a total goof. They didn't wave, they didn't smile, they didn't do anything but meet my gaze stoically and continue on to the kitchen. I can't overstate the not rightness I felt. I at first thought something was wrong, that they were upset. Understandably, they were going through a lot with the move and being shunned by our cult family members. So I got up to go do the mom thing, calling after them and hurrying up to catch them. I could have only been a step or two ahead of me. I left the room, rounded the corner to face the kitchen, more words on my lips, and no one was there. I was confused. I saw them go to the kitchen, so I called out for my kid, and their voice called back. From the other side of the house, still in their room, having never left. I went back to the living room and asked the others if they had seen Victor walk by, a little unnerved. My uncle said yes, as did my aunt. Tim said they had thought they saw him walk by but paid little mind. So, unless this was some weird shared hallucination, we all saw it. I've since found I am sensitive to the energy spirits give off, and apparently as it runs in the family, unknown to me till now, spiritual gifts are inherited. They call me a baby medium, so I feel confident in saying that I know whatever spirit took the form of my kid did not do so maliciously. They wanted to be noticed. Absolutely worked. In fact, most antics from spirits seem to be this, and I have come to accept that they are around me and my family, even after moving into our new apartment. I grew up in an 8-bedroom farmhouse with my dad until I grew up and moved out. We always had extra rooms not being used, and because of the age of the house plus all this extra space, there was always an eeriness, like someone looming in the shadows. If I had to get a drink in the middle of the night, I looked at the ground the whole time because I was scared of what may be looking back at me from the dark corners, rooms, and hallways. Even the windows and mirrors were avoided because I wasn't sure what I'd see looking back at me. When I was around 12 years old, I questioned why the room that used to be my nursery was locked from the outside. I didn't think it was weird before then. My dad needed a room for storage, and I figured he just wanted to keep me out. I brought it up to him one day, asking what's so important in there that he needed to keep me out, even though I'm not a child anymore. Typical 12-year-old mentality. Turns out I was not entirely correct about the log. My dad, with a very serious demeanour, sat me down and answered my inquiry. When I was a baby, I slept in this nursery room on the second floor, next to my dad's room. This room was painted by my sister especially for me, with Winnie the Pooh characters and fluffy clouds, the type of thing I think back on and appreciate. The effort and creativity was so admirable. I have a photo of me smiling at Pooh Bear on the wall while we were setting it up, but I'm not the most tech savvy to figure out how to link this photo. Anyway, I was in this nursery in my crib, again, right next to my dad's room, the perfect age to be on my own. Every night, though, my dad was woken up by me crying. He'd raised 4 children before me, so he was not making first time parent mistakes that would otherwise be in question. He thought it was probably the switch to being in my own room rather than being in his room that caused my nightly discomfort. He considered bringing my crib back into his room, but of course the nursery was all ready to go. I just graduated. For a while, when I cried in terror, he would come in and check on me, only to find that nothing was wrong, in the sense of present stresses like temperature, diaper change, hungry or thirsty, etc. He would stay with me until I fell asleep or keep the light on to make me feel safer, and then return to his room to get some actual rest. One night, after finally having enough of my distress, he decided to camp out on the floor of my nursery to see if he could figure out what was the matter, but mostly to try and sleep through the night. This was the last time anyone slept in there. I was able to doze off now that I wasn't alone. He, on the other hand, was tossing and turning on the hardwood floor, not comfortable enough to sleep. As he lay there on the floor, mulling over the situation, boom, 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 he was jolted to his feet by a few massive blows to the floorboards beneath him, centered directly on his back, as if someone on the first floor had a battering ram aimed at the ceiling. His first instinct was to rush downstairs and check for intruders. He is a man of logic, brave and ready to defend his family. However, when he got down there, the lights were off, there was no one downstairs, front doors locked, windows locked, no sign of forced entry. No one else lived with us. Our closest neighbour was down the road a quarter mile. And why would they break in just to bang on the ceiling, let alone have it mapped out where my dad would be sleeping in my nursery? And the force of the blows? This wasn't normal. After this event, my dad brought my crib back into his bedroom, and I was able to sleep without screaming or crying, beyond needing a diaper change or something normal. He brought the Bible into the nursery for extra measure, and casted out any evil that may have invited itself there. He locked up that nursery and only used it for storage after that, and only went in during the daytime. To this day, that old lock is still on the door, as if a lock keeps spirits locked in. Short of pretending that experience never happened, he couldn't rationalize it enough to do anything else. We think that the entity was evil and malicious, and when my dad tried protecting me, this only made it pissed off. As I grew up in that house, I had a hard time sleeping in my room on my own. Many nights I ended up rushing to the couch in the living room, turning the TV on and watching Disney till I fell asleep. But even then I was not comfortable. There were always eyes on me. There were many more unexplained events from the farmhouse, but this was the most direct encounter with evil my dad has ever had. I've always been a bit of a skeptic when it comes to paranormal experiences. My family's religious and believes in spirits and demons, and I do as well. But I never exactly bought into any of the actual stories of entities inhabiting houses and stuff. Now, however, I'm not so skeptical. If anything, I'm downright terrified. I still have no idea what really happened. My boyfriend came over last night to watch a movie and chill, nothing out of the ordinary. I'm currently dog sitting for some neighbours down the streets, nothing big. I've done it quite a few times for them before, so I know the routine and everything. Never really felt nervous at night or anything. At around 10 p.m, my boyfriend and I left the house to go walk the dog. It was dark out, we were just chatting as we went down the street. We approached the driveway, and I just got this weird feeling in my stomach. But I chalked it up to being a stomach cramp and continued up the driveway. I opened the garage door and walked inside. As I'm walking in, my boyfriend just stopped dead in his tracks in the middle of the garage. I kind of assumed he just didn't want to go in, since it's an unfamiliar house and all, so I continued on. There's 2 layered doors leading into the house, a big wooden one followed by a glass door. I opened the wooden one and instantly got this weird feeling in my gut. Let me preface by saying that I personally am not a fan of the dark and prefer to keep the lights on, especially when I'm alone in someone else's house. For this exact reason, I'd always made sure to keep a few lights in the house on for when I went to dog sit at night. As I opened the glass door, I realised that every single light in the house was off. The only sliver of light I could see was coming from the closed bathroom door. I murmured something about it to my boyfriend, who also noticed the bathroom light and was still standing in the garage. I finally stepped inside the house and instantly faltered. The atmosphere was just so aggressive. I felt extremely vulnerable and exposed the second I walked in. The dog's kennel and food is directly to the left of the door, so I turned to go take her out. As I was getting ready to open her kennel door, I just got this inexplicable urge to look behind me. Turning around, I stared directly into the empty and dark living room, and my heart just stopped. I felt waves of nausea and fear start to wash over me. It was like something was staring right back at me from within the darkness. The raw, primal fear was something I've never felt before. It felt as if whatever was watching me from there was just waiting for the chance to hurt me. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run and just get out of there. My boyfriend was saying things to me from the doorway, but I genuinely couldn't understand him. I was too scared to talk. I finally turned to look at my boyfriend, who stared straight back at me and whispered that we needed to go right then and there. He looked like he was about to throw up. I could tell from the look on his face that he was feeling the exact same fear as I was. I opened the kennel as fast as I could, grabbed the dog, and we bolted. I was instinctively tearing up as we left the garage from pure fear, and I could tell my boyfriend was as well. We waited until we were at the entrance of the driveway to even risk talking. My boyfriend told me he felt like something was horribly wrong in the house, and that he'd felt as if he was about to vomit from fear and nausea. I got even more freaked out hearing him describe the same symptoms I felt. If I'd been the only one to experience this, I would have chalked it up to a simple fear of the dark reaction, but hearing his words just made it so much worse. At first I was assuming that this was part of a home invasion, convinced someone was waiting in the dark with a gun. I contacted the owner of the house, who confirmed that they owned automatic lights, but that they shouldn't have all gone off like that. Truly wonderful words to ease my fears. I then called my mom, who was still at our house, telling her what happened as we walked the dog down the street. My boyfriend was attempting to calm himself down as I talked, and I think we were both just super shaken up at that point. It felt like we'd escaped a near-death experience. After some persuasion, she agreed to go back to the house with us to help us check everything out, but it was clear she didn't exactly believe us. To be honest, I don't care. I just wanted to have an extra person with me in case of a home intruder or something. See, I didn't really think it could have been anything paranormal at that point. I was just terrified that there was someone in that house with a weapon. She walked with us back to the house and we explained the terror we'd felt inside there, and our gut feeling to instantly book it. We approached and walked up the driveway cautiously, careful for any signs of a break-in. As we finally approached the garage door, however, the dog just started going crazy, batshit wild, snarling and growling at the garage door like something was on the other side. And the fear and nausea came back in full force, to the point where I couldn't stop crying. The tears were just coming down my face. The closer I got to the carriage door, the worse it felt. I practically begged my mom to back up from the garage door. She seemed pretty concerned at this point and contacted the owner again as the dog continued to growl. After a quick conversation, we all eventually decided to open the garage door with bated breath. Nobody was inside. Walking into the house, I felt the terrifying presence fade a bit, but the atmosphere was still just really eerie and unsettling. We turned the lights on, and after a few moments of tense silence, sort of relaxed. The dog ran to her food bowl. All was calm. Then my boyfriend pointed out that the bathroom lights, which had previously been on, was off. The door was also cracked slightly open. We sort of nervously laughed about it, and after the dog finished eating, I went to put her back in a kennel. The door to the kennel was latched shut. I knew I hadn't shut it when we left, and just pushing it closed wouldn't have been enough to completely latch it shut. It's one of those dog kennel doors that you need to push the latch in two directions to properly use it. The cold chill came back to me, and I shared a worried glance with my boyfriend. My mom then abruptly stood up and announced that it was time for us to leave. We all walked back to the house in relative silence, and my boyfriend and I just cuddled for the rest of the night. He mentioned that he felt like the experience was supernatural or paranormal, and I agreed with him. There were basically no signs of a robber or anything. It definitely felt like some kind of malicious entity, but maybe it wasn't. Everything that happened was just so surreal, and I'm not even sure anymore. I get chills thinking about it though. This is a personal experience, but I will start by explaining a little bit of what my grandma used to tell me. We have this not so old house, around 50 years or so, that my grandparents used to live in. My mum and I when I was younger as well, before moving to a newer house on the outside of town. She always said that there lives a friend, or so she calls her, who will sometimes roam the house during night, and rarely you could hear him during daytime. He never harmed her or anyone, at least not that I'm aware of, but he will always caught your eye in a glimpse. You know when you think you see a shadow moving, so you turn in order to inspect? That sort of thing. There isn't any amulet around the house except for a plate with salt under the bed my grandma used to sleep. I guess it's there since she told me one time she woke up to see a friend sitting on the foot of her bed while watching over just to disappear a few seconds after. After some years and due to personal issues, my mom, stepdad, and I lived there for about 3 years. They never claimed to have experienced anything, maybe because they were sleeping in the bedroom that my grandparents used to sleep in, and it had the salt, or maybe because they aren't that susceptible about paranormal. On the other hand, I slept on the room that I used as a kid, and didn't have any kind of protective charm nor salt. For the 3 years that I lived there, a lot of times I used to hear things at night, as well as seeing shadows move here and there during night and daytime. I'm not that much into paranormal things either, so I don't know a huge amount. But every week, at least 2 or 3 times, I would wake up in the middle of the night with a feeling of being uneasy, like something was around or had just passed through. Being an old house, we didn't have an AC, so some night during the summer, I would sleep on the couch in the living room while there was a nice breeze of air. I remember clear as day that on my last summer in that house, 2 of those nights, I woke up in a sweat, my mom claiming that I was screaming. And what I would claim, that there was sleep paralysis. Never actually seen this friend like my grandma did, but I can assure you there was something in that house. Now I live in the outskirts at that same time. You know where? Exactly, in front of the graveyard. I've been living here for about a year, and so far no shadows out of the corner of my eye. No weird sounds, nothing at all. The nights are peaceful, and I never woke up again. Sometimes I go to that house to search for things that I forgot to pack, but only for a short period of time, so I never felt anything again. Still, those experiences will go with me until the end of my days. Bonus encounter. This was before living in the old house. I lived in a flat at this time when came back from a long car travel my parents left, and I went to take a shower. Before entering the bathroom, something caught my eye, and when I turned my head to see what it was, I saw this tall lady in a wedding dress for a split second before it vanished. I was paralyzed and rushed inside the shower until my parents came back. Never talked about it with them since I blame it on the journey fatigue, but who knows? Never e- experienced anything else while living there. I'm 18 now, but from ages 3 to 11, my family and I lived in a large 4 bedroom Victorian home. It wasn't really the location you would expect a haunted house to be in. We were right next to a busy street in a row of other houses. All very old though. The house had 3 floors as the attic had been converted into 2 bedrooms, and a large walk in storage cupboard that separated the 2 rooms. I lived with my three older half siblings, and so it was very common for us to swap rooms every few months. I'd slept in every room, my parents' room quite often, as I was terrified every night. More on that later. The large room opposite theirs, and the two attic rooms. Each one seemed to have its own different type of horrors. For the first few years, I was too terrified to sleep on my own as a kid. I barely slept, and when I did, I suffered from terrible nightmares. So I would sleep in a camp bed in their room. That was where I had my first encounter with sleep paralysis. I couldn't have been older than 6, but I still remember it vividly. A small boy with a paper bag over his head seemed to emerge seemingly from the wall next to my mother's side of the bed, and slowly but surely was walking around their bed towards me. I remember looking to my side, and there was what I can only describe as a tall, black stick figure, like one of those drawings, who was looking above me. I couldn't move. I was sweating profusely, but I knew I was awake. The next thing I knew, he was crouching down to me, and the boy had reached the foot of my bed. It was that moment I managed to let out a scream. I've never had anything as vivid as that again, but I'll never forget it. When I was 7 or 8, I started wanting to have my own room. I did a lot of reading to distract myself from the fear, and often would stay up to the early hours reading, too terrified to sleep, waking up in the morning with my books still in my arms. I was given one of the attic rooms. By that point, my older sister had the room opposite mine, but she'd gone off to university, and so I was alone up there. I would never dare sleep without the light on, and to be honest, old habits never die, as even now I still sleep with a light unless I'm with my boyfriend. Most nights would be me reading as long as I could, until I just had to close my eyes. It was then that the voices would start, like there was a couple arguing in the hall. On some of the worst nights, I swear I could hear breathing coming from under my bed. It came to a point where I was so scared I had to have my dog and cat sleeping in my room with me, but they couldn't settle. My dog would just keep crying and my cat was constantly spooked. They hated being in there, so I had no choice but to remain alone. The night terrors continued. I'd wake up and just couldn't stand to be in that room anymore, so I'd creep down to the second floor and sleep outside my parents' door. I don't know how I even functioned with so little sleep. Most times I couldn't have sleepovers, as my friends would complain of being scared and hearing things. My siblings had similar experiences. When my sister had her friend over, often a friend would recount waking up in the night, and my sister was sitting up in bed, still asleep, but talking to the dark corner. My brother would have his covers pulled off him in the night, and my other sister recalled her toes being pinched while sleeping. Everyone had their own experiences in that house, even non-believers. My dad recounted being locked out from the outside of the house when he was out in the garden. Even though he was the only one home, seeing a dark shadow figure glide next to the door as he struggled to open it. Times I would be sitting outside my parents' room at 3 in the morning, and I would hear the cutlery drawer downstairs being shaken, the TV being turned on for a split second and then off, even though everyone was asleep. I couldn't do anything in that house without the feeling I was being watched. If I was alone in the house, I'd stay out in the garden the whole time. Even then I felt extremely uneasy. I would sit on my trampoline and feel like a pair of eyes were watching me from the living room window that looked out into the garden. Our elderly neighbour told my father the backstory of the house, while my dad would sometimes recount the strange occurrences going on in the house. He told us years before we moved in, there lived a very reclusive middle-aged woman, known to be very cold and unwelcoming. She didn't often leave, only to go to work as a gym teacher. She was known to be sadistic and cruel to the children she taught. He mentioned something extremely chilling though, which was that she had confided with him once that she lived in fear of the house. She refused to go in the attic as it terrified her. She died several years before we moved. One of the most chilling things was that once she passed, the house was completely renovated. The attics turned into rooms, as I mentioned. The flower beds Mrs. Evans had so much pride in, torn up. Everything changed. The work was mostly done by one man, who had been hired to do so by the local council who inherited the house, and Miss Evans had no family to speak of. Just days after he'd finished up the renovation, his daughter died in a freak lightning accident. I personally have no idea if it's tied. It was terribly unfortunate either way. But the neighbours seemed to think that whatever was in that house certainly did not take kindly to it being damaged, and decided to take some revenge. That is just hearsay, mind you, but it's chilling nevertheless. I believe there were several entities in that house, including possibly Mrs. Evans herself, but the strongest residing in the attic. I felt things up there that I've since never encountered again. A genuine feeling of something evil, something that wants to hurt you. I can't even recall how many times people were seemingly pushed when going down the stairs from the attic, or whatever. My cat, who was usually the most lovely boy, was near those stairs. He would viciously attack you with no explanation for this outburst. The whole house had its moments. It was in a constant state of darkness and bitter cold, but the attic? I don't even have the words to describe what that was. When we finally moved when I was 11, and as if by magic, the nightmares disappeared. I could finally sleep easy. We've moved several times since then, and I've never encountered a house like that before. Honestly, I haven't had any paranormal experiences I can think of since being in that house, but that's fine for me. It was enough for a lifetime. I do think it will always be with me though. Sometimes I'll have the most vivid dreams that I'm back there, and I'm so glad to be there, almost as if it's calling me back. I've always been skeptical, even though I've had plenty of paranormal experiences. Ever since I was young, maybe 4 or 5, I've seen what looks like ghosts. I'll see random people for a few seconds and then they will disappear. Some people I would see were pretty scary. When I was 9, I told someone about it. Big mistake. Everyone said I did it for attention and that it was all in my head, blah blah blah. My mum would constantly tell me that there were no ghosts. Now that you have some backstory, here's what happened last night. I was in the washroom, getting ready for bed and brushing my teeth. I turned around and saw one of the 2 ghosts I believe are in my house in my husband's side of the bed. It vanished after a few seconds. It freaked me right out, like seeing them usually does, so I told myself how it's all just in my head and ghosts aren't real. As soon as I said ghosts aren't real, the bathroom lights flickered. So, either a creepy coincidence happened or I really did see a ghost. Why would the lights flicker suddenly after saying that? I know lights do that all the time, but this was strange. I'm still a bit of a skeptic, but I swear with every experience I have, I believe more and more. And after this happened last night, I believe even more now. This story belongs to the medieval times. When there used to be kingdoms in India, there were infamous gangs of thugs known as dacoits and or bandits. They used to rob innocent travellers on isolated roads, many times often killing them. The kingdom of Marathas, now known as Maharashtra state of India, were frustrated by one of such notorious gangs of dacoits consisting of 5 to 6 members and had a bounty on them. So this dacoits had a big loot one day and decided to take a refuge in an old house called the Wada, an old house structure mainly popular in Maratha community, and split the loot. The Wada was situated slightly out of an abandoned village in the middle of the jungle, and the area was avoided by other nearby villagers due to the haunting stories. A perfect hideout for the dacoits to pass the night. But it was not just an ordinary night. It was Amavasya, a new moon night. It is said in India that most of the paranormal activities are enhanced on this day. On top of that, it was raining. All in all, a deep, dark night. The dacoits were happy and celebrating their victory. Some of them were even drinking in one of the inner rooms of the Wada, with one single oil lamp for light. As the night was slowly passing by, during their conversations and laughing and arguments, some of them started hearing a very low and strange voice of a lady singing. The song was something of a lory, kind of Indian lullaby which Mother sings. But they ignored it, as they first thought they were just hallucinating due to alcohol, or it's just the raindrops, or simply night creatures making weird noises. So they continued their talking, but after a while, the voice of the song became prominent. Even the one who didn't drink started hearing the voice. So two of them went to check the house with a hunch of someone might be spying on them, but they found nothing. At last, all of them came to a conclusion that they are just hallucinating, and started their little party again. The celebrations slowly started to grow into arguments as to who will keep what. The greed started playing its part. The argument started to turn into conflict, and the voices of them arguing started to break the eerie, deep, silent night. When all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a loud noise of a small baby crying came from a deep, dark room around the corner. All the dacoits who almost drew their weapons to fight froze. All of them started looking at each other, shaking with fear, and one of the gang members indicated their leader with the eyes of, "What do we do?" The leader, the man in his 50s, a hardcore criminal with nothing to fear attitude, not knowing of the situation he was facing, snapped out of it and shouted angrily, "Who's there? Come out, or we'll come over and kill you and drink your blood." For a moment, all the dacoits holding their weapons, staring hard to see if they can find someone out in that room, got some courage because of their leader's words. The two of them who checked the WADA earlier and who happened to miss out on that one single room, looked at each other and decided to check the room from which the voice came. But as soon as they took one or two steps towards it, the cry of a little child started again. This time more prominent, and strikingly, all of a sudden, an angry loud voice of a lady came from that room. "How dare you wake my child up? Don't you see my child is trying to sleep? Get out of my WADA." It was at this moment all of them realised that they have disturbed something more sinister, something which they cannot kill with their mere weapons. All of them went into flight mode and started running in whichever direction they could. One of them died on the spot due to shock. All of them started shouting loudly in panic, "Help, Mother Kali, Indian goddess, help us." The cry was the same as their victims would during the loots, as if karma had come back to bite them. All of them running into different directions due to panic and lost their way to the exit of the WADA. With no lamps to navigate or any source of light whatsoever, a simple big old rusty house became a maze for them, but somehow they managed to escape. One of them who knew the nearby village somehow managed to reach there. Coincidentally, a unit of soldiers who were tracking the dacoits were in the same village. They caught him immediately, or rather, this terrified thug who was wounded all over due to cuts and bruises because of running into the jungle crazily, surrendered immediately. Shaking with fear, the dacoit told all the incident to the soldiers, even though it was a good opportunity for the soldiers to track and catch them all by the night. They decided not to. Initially, me and George did not get along very well. He was pretty restless and would often stomp around upstairs, opening and closing drawers and opening them, slamming shut doors. Usually when I was either in my room, also upstairs, or downstairs in the living room. It often would be so obvious I would have to grab my baseball bat or a knife to go through the house to check for intruders. After quite a few times of this happening, I gradually realised this was the work of something else. I'm no stranger to paranormal experiences, but I hadn't dealt with something this explicit, particularly during the day as it so often was, although he did have his fun at night. Eventually it got to the point where I was getting irritated. I was watching TV downstairs when, again, the door to the master bedroom slammed shut and drawers started to open and close alongside stomping. I'd been downstairs for a few hours, so I knew it wouldn't be a burglar or intruder. Called out saying something along the lines of, "I've no problem with you being in this house, but you've seriously got to chill out. If you're cool with me, then I'm cool with you." And the noises from upstairs immediately stopped. I would still hear him every now and then, but it had largely calmed down. Maybe some kind of frustration with not being acknowledged. I'm not going to try and guess. I don't know when I decided to start calling him George, but I got that sense that he approved of the name. Sometimes I could feel his presence in a room, especially when alone, and he's not particularly fond of my dogs. He hasn't done anything to them. And when I could feel him in a room when I was with my dogs, they were very cautious and would watch where I'm guessing he was in the room. Usually when he was close, there's a kind of static in my vision. I've since moved from that house for university, and to my surprise, George came with me. Although he largely leaves me alone, I still hear him from time to time. He has, however, picked up the habit of annoying my roommate. Moving things into completely different rooms, turning off appliances, taking his bookmark out of books that he's reading, and a few other things that I can't really remember. I'm about to move again and can't help but feel sad at the thought that George won't come with me, as it's almost comforting knowing he's around. I feel like maybe he's now attached himself to my roommate. Anyways, moral of the story is, if you have a thumping, meddling spirit ghost, maybe they're just after a bit of company. Amicable coexistence can be possible. I want to preface this by saying that this happened as an encounter for my husband, and as a sort of sleep paralysis for me. We're in the process of moving out of our home. He got a teaching job elsewhere in the States, and they're doing in-person learning now, and the 3+ hour drive to get there just isn't practical anymore. Last week, he was cleaning some shower tiles, and 2 of them broke off, revealing crumbled sheetrock. This house was not built to code. He told me that a few days ago, he saw that he could only describe as a cross between Samara from The Ring and cousin It from the Addams Family, just standing there in the bedroom, less than 5 feet away from him. Coming up to his about chest height, he's 6 foot. He walked right through it, a little further into this vacuum cleaner. We've been sleeping on top of the covers the past few nights because it's been too hot to sleep under them. I don't know if I was already asleep, starting to fall asleep or what the case was, but I remember looking on the doorway out of the room and seeing a figure that had the same features, same height as what my husband saw. The difference is, it made a grabbing motion with its hand, palm inward. Of course, I got startled and slid under the covers and didn't look again for the rest of the night. This isn't the first encounter I've had with ghosts. Our dearly departed dog is still among us and makes his presence known with his snoring. However, this is the first time I've seen a human-like ghost, clearly, and not just as a mind trick. I also want to mention that I was working for a client for a few weeks in her home, and she told me about a ghost in her closet that grabs all of the female caregivers if they don't enter the closet with caution. Apparently, the last tenant in her house hung himself in the closet. I took note of what she said, and always knocked and greeted before entering, stating my purpose. I'm not aware of any backstory to our residence. Is there any explanation for what has or is happening here? My husband is thinking that maybe is unhappy with us leaving. I just don't want to be afraid to fall asleep if there's no cause for alarm. I recently moved into a new apartment. An old military barracks from the Civil War that was turned into an apartment. And I've seen several spooky things. I don't want to make this too long, so I'll cut to the chase. Out of the corner of my eye, I have seen black figures walking around out of my bathroom. A male figure poking his head around the corner of my door. A gentleman who just sits at the window, and one in my closet. The one in my closet physically gives me the shakes, as he's the only one out of the figures I've seen that gives me the feeling of being unsafe. The apartment itself is set on a giant field, the literal battlefield of my city where the Civil War happened, and my parents say the figures I'm seeing are likely soldiers who died an early death. I've spoken my concerns to my father, who's a retired 82nd Airborne guy, and he claims when he lived in the barracks he saw all kinds of things like this, and that no one ever got hurt. However, with the following things I'm going to list, I'm questioning my safety. Again, it's just one in my closet who frightens me. I moved in with two cats who refused to go anywhere near the closet, and when the door was open, they hissed at the closet several times. I had put their food bowl and water bowl outside the closed closet door, and they refused to go near it. I moved the bowls and tried to put their litter near it, but again, they refused to go near it. They've since been transferred to my sister's house because they wouldn't stop yelling, meowing insanely loud all night. I also own two TVs. When I moved out, I received my parents' TV on top of mine, and the one that is plugged into the wall close to the closet door, within a few inches, constantly turns itself on and off, changes channels, and sometimes goes to static. Every other electronic in my house is perfectly fine. The closet just gives off this awful energy, and everything that goes near it seems to malfunction or just hate being there. I'm unsure what to do. I'd like to add I have made a friend in the apartment complex, and she claims to see things as well. However, there's another figure that I didn't mention here because I don't see a reason to. But for those sticklers who are going to ask, across the field, outside my window, is a lady in a pitch black dress hanging and swinging from a tree. The friend claims she's never seen that figure across the field, but I can see the figure clearly from my window. I'm on the top fourth floor where my dad and landlord both claim generals would meet at random times. Sometimes at night, but very rarely, it's usually midday or around noon.